Use the which one? Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. Technology challenged. So road salt, another four-letter word. I first want to say, so I think this road salt thing. A lot of times I'm here or in other places addressing what's bad about it, right? And I recently actually wrote um, an article about road salt in the Adirondack Explorer, and what I suggested there was I think it's now time. Chris and I actually been working on this issue here for 10 years now. So this has been a really cool friendship that we've developed through salt. But I think because of the progress we made, and I'm going to share a little bit with you this morning, both what's bad about it and then maybe what we can do about it. But I think it's time now that road salt sort of takes on this new identity, right? Because we're much more aware of it now. Anyone in the room here now, when we talk about road salt pollution of water, is there anybody here, it's okay, but is there anybody here that's not sort of aware of it at this point? Because that'd be good context. So it seems like maybe everybody is. A little bit of important context about me. Right before I started working on solving this issue of road salt pollution, I was a partner of the largest private firm in the country, probably in the world actually, that applies this stuff as a private contractor. So we're a very large company, and I oversaw all of our snow operations as the last part of my role there before I left the business in 2011. And so I used to purchase millions of tons of this stuff and apply it, and this was actually our biggest moneymaker, believe it or not. So that's part of the problem, right? So there's a lot of issues that go in hand with this, but I think just knowing that I used to be on the other end of this, and back then we didn't know it was a problem. And I'll tell you, even 10 years later after working on this, I'm surprised at how many people still don't know this is a problem. So it is a little bit of an epidemic, just a quiet one. I recently engaged with the folk down in Cayuga Lake. Does anybody know where that is? Down Ithaca. Did you know that the largest salt mine on the East Coast is actually under that lake? Yeah, I'm amazed by that nobody really actually knows that. And it's polluting the heck out of it, right? But yeah, so it's a huge mine owned by Cargill, and they're trying to sell it. So the other thing that's interesting then, so this right here, I took a picture of these mountains of salt. This is in a place called Trade Point Atlantic, which is down in the, it's just southeast of the Baltimore. It's one of the big ports. And a friend of mine actually owns all this salt. This is Ron Ekman's salt. Those mountains, if you can kind of see, it's kind of pixelated here, but like that is a huge tractor trailer that carries a lot of this. So this will carry about 100 tons. There's about 250,000 tons that you see in this picture, right? So what you see in this picture is what's being applied just in the Adirondacks every year on the roads. The other interesting thing is, so even though we have the largest salt mine on the East Coast not far from us, a lot of our salt actually doesn't even come from here. So a lot of our salt comes from, a lot of the Mexican salt actually goes to the West Coast, and then a lot of the other salts that come across from other parts of the on the other side of the Atlantic actually that hits a lot of the East Coast. So anybody have any idea how much salt is in this barge? Hazard a guess? And this is actually a wheel loader that you can see right there that holds about 5 tons in itself in each bucket. So there's about 50 to 55,000 tons on this barge that's coming across. So not only are we polluting our waters with our own salt, but a lot of our water is actually being polluted by salt that's coming in from somewhere else. And it's a very interesting issue to me, because there's no other material that you can import into the United States without a major permitting process because of the contaminants that are in it. for some reason we don't consider salt a contaminant, even though it is a pollutant designated by the EPA, right? So it's just very interesting. It's highly unregulated. And then imagine just, you know, the freight and the carbon footprint. So it's very interesting, the life cycle of salt as well, of what it's costing us, right? So the specific problem that we're dealing with here in Lake George, and really in any water body where it's impacted by road salt, is simply it's non-point source runoff that, unlike any other pollutant, or most other pollutants, it never biodegrades. So like we talk about fertilizers and pesticides and all those other nasty things that we get in the water too, and I've dealt with a lot of that stuff too. Those are treated a little bit differently though. Some of those do biodegrade. Some of those, the solution, the pollution is dilution in some cases. In this case, that's not what happens here. And so there was a chart that Chris showed me 10 years ago. Since we've been measuring in the 80s in Lake George and other places, you just see this continuous trending or rise of accumulation of salt. And so because what happens is the chloride, so sodium chloride is the typical salt used, it's the chlorides that actually accumulate, right? So it's not just the sodium, right? So we think about sodium when we think about drinking water, but now we're having to look at chloride when we even think about drinking water. And so in this case, it settles to the bottom and then it accumulates. And then over time, it's actually, you know, impacting the actual ecosystem, you know, including fish, let's say, right? So it permanently pollutes the water. 1 teaspoon of salt pollutes 5 gallons of water. 1 teaspoon, right? So if you can imagine how many teaspoons are in that 250,000 ton piles, we're polluting a heck of a lot of water forever, right? At least in our lifetime. And then the other interesting thing, this is actually how I got involved, is one would assume that most of this is coming from the big trucks on the big roads. So I want you to think about it in these terms though. A lane mile of road, so if you drive up this road, on one side of the road, a lane mile of road is semi-equivalent to an acre of parking lot. So if you think about any commercial district in particular, anywhere in the country really, think about how many lane miles of parking lot are on each side of that lane mile of road. So for every lane mile of road, you might have 100 miles of parking lot. And so that's where a lot of this comes from as well. So in the Adirondack Park, it's a little bit unique. We do think more of it's a road system issue, but then there are pockets like just even in the south end of the basin here, there's a lot of parking lot. And so one could assume that a lot of that comes from here, from those parking lots. And that's why I got involved with this, because it suddenly put the target on to the back of the private industry, and I was the biggest player in that at one time, and I was the guy buying all the salt. So I've always joked, for those of you who've heard me speak before, this is a little bit of my penance, if you will. So the other bottom line is this, though, and this is what's interesting to me as a contractor, is that makes money at this, is there is a lot of waste, right? And a lot of the waste is just simply because we don't want to change. A lot of the waste is because there is some liability attached to this, right? Both in vehicle accidents and slip and falls. And so there's a diversity of political, economic, environmental, social, technological, legal issues. We call it pestle, but there's a lot of different issues that are surrounding this in what's, again, pretty much a completely non-regulated issue, right? So it's just fascinating to me that, you know, how complex the issue really can look at once you understand everything that's going on with it. So it's not just here. This map actually probably needs to be updated. I wrote an article about this a few years ago, and really when I started to study this, a lot of this issue was sort of discovered in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, where all of their drinking water there, primarily most of it is from wells, which a lot of people don't know that either. And they're all highly contaminated. And so they've been trying to work on this for about 20 years. And so I got involved with that during my time in the industry. Out in Kitchener-Waterloo area, there's a program that they started years ago called the Smart About Salt program. That was also in response to the same issue. All of their drinking water there is wells as well. So, and then in New Hampshire, they started something called the Green Snow Pro certification in response to a construction project. They wanted to widen the I-93 corridor from South Boston up into the Lakes districts of New Hampshire, and that got stopped because of some small water bodies that were just highly contaminated with this stuff, and they thought it was coming from the DOT. So if you go back to this was their DOT's response to it. They had been studying this too and said, we're actually only less than 10% of the problem. So try again. And that's where this certification was born, which, you know, there's been a diversity of arguments whether that even works, right? Because it's voluntary, but it was a good start, right? And, but there is a limited liability legislation attached to it, which was interesting. And then that program that I got involved with there is actually, I think, what introduced us together, Chris, here. And so that's when we started working together, again, 10 years ago. And I will tell you, we work on this issue in a lot of different places, including all of these places. There's something very special about the model that's been created here. This is the model that actually works. And so that's an exciting thing that we've seen. I still think we got a long way to go because scaling the success is really the next challenge. But we have, we've consistently, wherever we're working on this, either with a municipality or private organization, we've been able to reduce by 50% or greater, right? And 50% was sort of our initial target years ago. We thought that that's just through the science that Chris and Jim Sutherland have done in particular, we know that that could actually sort of help stop the trend or at least start to reverse the trend. And Chris can speak more to where they've actually seen that at a water level now. Chris and I both worked together on the Governor's Salt Task Force that was created a few years ago. I think that's finally getting some legs now in legislation. I think Chris and I would both agree that the pace of government is frustrating at times, but I think we're getting somewhere now, right? And then a lot of what's been going on here has inspired other initiatives, including park-wide now, Adirondack Park Ride, the Clean Water Safe Roads Initiative, which LGA has done a nice job of collaborating with 80K Action on sharing some of the successes there and how that works. So getting directly into the solutions, I think from my perspective, one of the foundational approaches that I think was unique and I think is now being duplicated throughout different parts of not only the state but the country is what I call, we were the fun for Lake George back when we started, but the LGA model really is, there was this memorandum of understanding that at least got the ball rolling, at least got some folks to sort of semi-commit to following some best practices. And then that's really where the SWIM standards of policy for measuring, calibration, prevention, analysis, improvement, optimization, that's where that was born. And so that's really the standards that we've been following here in Lake George ever since, right? And just trying to help both municipal organizations and private organizations follow those. Standards of policy enable standards of process. Processes enabled through technology, methodologies and technology. And so you may have heard about, we used to call them years ago the black boxes, but we started measuring salt very consistently in every truck that we work with. We're measuring level of service. The technologies include things like segmented plow technologies. You've heard of like live edges, probably some of you. And we've, so through our work with LGA, we've introduced all that into this region, and it's been quite successful. The biggest thing that I stress, though, is with all the best tools and technologies, this is very much a culturally embedded issue. And that's really where our work either starts or stops, right? So many, for as many successes as we've had, we've been turned away too, right? Just people just don't want to change how they do things. And so I think that we're finally getting over sort of the hump of that. So I think the tipping point, we've started to tip in the right direction more consistently now. And that's, I think, where the scale happens, right? And a lot of what I think happens with culture is like just all of us in this room, right? We're part of the culture here of the basin. We're part of the culture of how salt's used, because as much as I think you could all agree, even just through what you've just heard, ooh, salt bad, right? Ooh, slippery road bad too. Ooh, I've got to get somewhere at the same time every day. If I can't, that bad too, right? So I don't know why I'm caveman suddenly, but it's that's the issue though, right? Is we're also a little bit of the Amazon Prime society, and we expect what we want when we want it now. And so that's why a lot of times when we like to point even to the New York DOT for, well, look at how much salt they use. It's like, well, you also have to look at how much we yell at them, how much we expect of them. Everybody's critical of them because, oh, they have a bare road. It's like, well, it's because we kind of created it, right? So we're the customer, they're the service provider. So I'm used to being the service provider. I'm used to being yelled at. And you don't want me to pollute the water, and you also don't want me to give you anything less than what you expect. It's a really tough balance. It's a really tough balance. So, and then if you think about just at your own homes and your own driveways, where do you contribute to this, right? So if you took a coffee mug, if you have a 10 by 100 foot driveway, all you need is a coffee mug, not half the bag, right? How many of you are using half the bag? We all do it, right? Again, I was the biggest user, so. And then I think what's really happened then is this whole issue, and I think this is again where society plays a role in this, but where we play a role in engaging society is, this is where I think salt again can take on this new identity. So we've actually created a whole community, in my opinion, so, based on this issue, right? So this picture here really is just like 10 years ago, we didn't have these pictures. 10 years ago, nobody wanted to get involved with this. And now we're in barns, we're in shops, we're in offices, we're in conference rooms, we're talking about this, we're training people, they're implementing change. And so, and getting excited about it. And so I think that's the thing that's exciting for me now is, I think now that we're at that tipping point, we're gonna see a lot more scale here, even in the basin. So I hope that's helpful, at least, beginning awareness for you all. It's my first time at this summit. I know you started this last year, so this is exciting to be here. If you do need to find me, I get really excited about talking about this. If you can't tell, if you need to find me, that's my email. I think it's in the agenda as well, but feel free to reach out, and I'll be here for the day.
Thanks, Phill, and it's been great working with Phill. I'm Chris Navitsky, Lake George Waterkeeper, and every time I hear him speak, I learn something new. And he was showing the barge from Mexico with the salt, and I think some of that's for margaritas myself, but a lot of it does wind up on the road. So partnering with Phill over the years, I'm going to close this out by talking about the LGA and what we've worked on. And give some information about what homeowners can do. But working with Phill over the past 10 years, we've probably invested about $1.5 million in the Lake George initiative for the live edge plows, for the training that they do to all the highway departments. So that's been a big investment, and as Phill said, we've actually seen towns, the town of Hague has reduced their road salt by 50%. So it's real encouraging, and we've got a ways to go, but here's that slide, sorry. I was introducing that. So one of the big projects, we worked with New York State DOT. We've got great relationships with the town, we have great relationships with DOT, but it was through our SAVE partnership with the municipalities. We met with DOT and said there's a problem going on. They actually implemented one of the first pilots along Route 9N, and this is right at the base of County Route 11, just north of Bolton, where they actually have a 17-mile stretch on road salt reduction. And we actually put together a study. We proposed it with DOT. They did not partner with us, so we as the fund LGA took that on. We've invested about $250,000, have studied that over 6 years, got a Lake Champlain Sea Grant for that, and you know what we found, we found mixed results actually. It was difficult. We actually selected 4 areas where there was no other influence except the state highways, which is not that easy with all the upland development, with all the town roads up on the highlands. But that way we could just isolate what the influence of the state practices were. So we set up instrumentation. We actually sample above the road and below the road so we can just isolate the influence from the road. And we did find that New York State DOT did reduce their application rates. They reduced them by about 15%. However, they wound up going out 2 to 3 times more often because, as Phil said, that cultural change. So they were putting down less salt, but to make sure, they actually went out 2 to 3 times more often. It wound up actually increasing salt loads in the streams that we were measuring. And here we are, you can see us gauging. This is actually English Brook right there, one of our stations. And I put this one in the middle. People think that, you know, being a waterkeeper is great, but it's not always just sitting on a boat. You have to go out and chop through ice, and your hands are freezing to try and get these samples. But the other thing that we found is that there's a big problem with groundwater. We were finding that, and we would get the information from DOT, actually there were 4 times as much salt in chlorides in the streams as what they put down that year. So what does that say? Our groundwater is actually becoming reservoirs, holding those chlorides, as Phil said earlier. And that's a big problem. But good stuff came out of this, because this past year, we saw DOT brine more on Route 9N this one year, this past summer. It wasn't that bad, than they did over the past 5 years combined. So we are getting somewhere. Phil talked about the graph of Lake George, chlorides increasing like that, but if we cut the road salt in half, it'll take 25 years to see that reduction in Lake George. So it is possible, big lake, but that was findings that we found from our Phill Brook study that we've had going on for 10 years. The Road Salt Task Force, as Phil said, we were both part of that. These are some of the recommendations on reduced targets, BMP's best management practices, snow and ice removal training, very important. We've got to train our highway departments, and we've got to make sure that they're aware of the new technology. Public access to data. We should have the right to know what's going on, as well as rapid response. I don't know what happened here. I'm just going on. I can't. Help. Our Salt Summit, it's coming up. October 1st, we're going to actually move it back up to Lake Placid again. So we'll have information on that in the future. And what can you do on your properties? Shovel early and often. You know, I have a 17-year-old daughter who now drives. You know, we get the snow. We didn't have a lot this year, but, you know, she drives out. I'm like, no, don't drive out on the snow. We've got to shovel first because it's going to get packed and this and that. Use an ice chipper. Apply only what's needed. Phil said what you really need is just a coffee cup. Reposition your downspouts. How many people have downspouts that go right out on their driveways or sidewalks? No. Then you're creating ice. You know, direct that elsewhere. Pile it properly. You know, don't put it on the uphill side. Put it on the downhill side of your driveway. Use salt-tolerant plants. That way the vegetation won't get scarred. And join the Salt Watch. That's a program by the LGA. You can get in touch with Lindsay and find out. You can actually do some citizen monitoring where you use little like pH strips almost to check the levels of salt. So with that, I don't know if we have questions.
We do have a few questions, and I do also, for the Salt Watch program, I did bring a few little visuals if anybody wants to check that out at the end. But we have a question: how much has pre-treating with salt brine helped with salt reduction?
Well, Phil's going to let me handle that because he's way back there. But I think it's really initially it saves at least one pass by the drivers, because if they go out, think of when you cook. What do? You spray your pan so that food doesn't stick. So that's the same thing with the brine on the road. You put that on the road so that the snow will not stick. And what it does is actually buys those drivers probably time to get out a little later in the morning. They don't have to get out right away. So at least, you know, one pass of the truck. So you can be reducing it by about 25, 30%.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions? These guys will be hanging out after